Well, welcome back once again to the Empowered Business Show. I'm grateful to be with you all again here on a Friday at noon Eastern Time, a little bit later in the day for my good friend Hayden. Hayden, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm really good. Yeah, so it's coming to the end of our Friday, 5 p.m. over here. So we're heading into the weekend, but in good style, thank you. So looking forward to being here again today. And just a big shout out to our ambassadors once again for taking care of us and taking care for all of our lovely viewers as we are back here on the Empowered Business Show.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great community we have here in the Empowered Living community and here on the Empowered Business Show. Today, we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to tie into what we talked about last week and something that sometimes gives us a little bit of a pit in our stomach,
Mm.
having those difficult conversations as we're aligning our values, our company values with the people in our organization. We talked a little bit last time, Hayden, about how important it is to be able to articulate our values, articulate our behaviors, and then really look at our people and find who are aligned with those values and those behaviors. So today we're going to talk about the next step, and that is having feedback conversations and really being able to get those difficult conversations started. So Hayden, how do you get those started? How do you help your company clients get those conversations started when they're necessary?
Yeah, it's a really good point because, as you said in the introduction, there, it's those conversations that can sometimes cause a real pit in the stomach. We don't like having them. In fact, I've never met anybody in any business who really enjoys having those conversations. It's not something that we look forward to. It's not something that makes our day, but we need to have them. We have to be willing to step into those conversations. And really, the first thing for me when I think about having those more difficult conversations is I always think about the output.
Mhm.
And I always think about, okay, we're going to have potentially a challenging conversation, but there's a reason why we're doing this. And I'm trying to focus on the output that I'm trying to create. And that may not be necessarily the output that both parties want,
Mhm.
but it's still the output that you're trying to create. And there's a reason why you're doing it. So I always try and connect in with it. My intention is to create a good output. And even though, so let's be upfront. We might be having a conversation with somebody about the fact we need to exit them from our business,
Sure.
right? Because we talked last week about sometimes those values don't align, and the person may not be right. They may have done a really good job to get us where we are, but they're not part of the next season of our business, and we don't see them being aligned to where we're trying to go to. And that can be a really challenging conversation to have, and so we don't look forward to it. So even though the conversation may not result in an outcome that the individual may want because they may not be a future part of our business moving forward, I still go into it wanting to set the intention that it's going to create the right next step for them.
Yeah, definitely.
Because even though they may not be part of the business, they'll be part of somebody's business moving forward. And I always go with the intention of, even if it's going to be difficult, let's leave the conversation in a place where that person can step out from that conversation with their esteem maintained,
Mhm.
feeling their sense of self worth maintained, and ready to take the next step in their career, whatever that next step is. Even though it may not be with your organization, I still want to leave people not diminished by the conversation, because I think that's the danger is we build them up. We know they're going to be challenging. We don't like doing them, and therefore we tend to go in, and we tend to go in with this kind of real, well, I'm just going to tell it straight, and they'll just have to deal with what I'm sharing, without that real care for them as an individual. That often leaves them feeling a little bit unsure what they've done, diminished, having their own confidence knocked by the way it's been dealt with. And I know, and I've seen people who've been damaged by that type of conversation. So that for me is wherever I approach these conversations from, I'm always thinking about, okay, I want to create the outcome on the other end that is positive for both parties, and then handle it in that way.
I love that you said that too, Hayden, because when we think about the outcome, we're moving a situation forward towards that outcome, and so oftentimes I talk about these conversations as speak straight conversations, but sometimes they can be thought of, wrongly in that, yeah, like you just described, I'm just going to go in and just speak it straight and just, get on with it. When that is really not the objective. The
Mm,
objective is to be able to help this individual move from our organization to perhaps another organization where they can then continue, giving their best and moving their own career forward and contributing, et cetera. But I think that one thing that oftentimes that leaders will miss in having these conversations is just admitting to their own discomfort. And
mm,
I recognize that in a true like human resources kind of a conversation, there are certain protocols we have to walk through. However, if it's a discussion where I just need to talk with somebody about someone's performance, or maybe even prior to exiting somebody, having a conversation that really makes me uncomfortable, um, admitting that just by
mm,
saying, hey Joe, I got to have a straight conversation with you, and I got to admit right now, I got a pit in my stomach because sometimes when I have these conversations, the words don't come out right. And so I just want to let you know that up front. But here's where I'm going with this conversation, and then kind of lead into it. But
yeah.
having that as our objective to be able to move a situation forward, whatever that situation forward, whatever that situation
Mm,
is our objective. And so I think that's so key. And just speaking straight and making sure that we are helping that individual again, in your example, if we're exiting somebody from our organization, we want them to know that they're still valued as a human. Their contribution to our organization was great. And I loved how you also stated it too. You talked about a season of our growth and our season of our company, and that is so true. I think that we forget that oftentimes in as organizations, there are seasons of our growth. And
mm.
sometimes there are people that are right for a season, and then there are people that aren't right for a season. And so, we have to have these difficult conversations. Let's switch a little bit, Hayden,
Mm,
unless you have something else to add. But one thought that I had too is just like feedback. Like,
mm.
how do we incorporate this into like just giving feedback and good feedback?
Well, it was where I was going as well, actually, because I really think the other thing that springs to mind is um, it's our responsibility as leaders within our business to face into these things as soon as we see them. Because often the person who we end up having to exit off the bus, which we use that analogy a lot, being on the bus, sometimes if we have the conversation early enough, we can align the values to a point where they come together and we then don't need to have the conversation that means about them leaving the bus. Sometimes we can't avoid it and it's the season and they played their part and that's fine. So for me, it's about capturing these things really early and then being prepared to have those conversations on a regular and consistent basis that helps people to identify when they're on track or off track, and not just in their performance and their metrics, but in their behaviors, in the way that they show up, in the way that they demonstrate their alignment to the cultural standards that you have in your business, and having those conversations frequently, often, consistently with our teams, so they've got that signal constantly as to whether they're on track or off track. And I know we've talked a little bit about this, and obviously your flight background is, you know, I always tell this story with my colleagues is, or with my clients, sorry, is if you think about the autopilot on a plane, the autopilot is designed to assume that the plane is going to go off track. That's how they're set up. The algorithm is set up to say the plane is going to divert from its course. Our job is to steer them back onto course so they do get to their destination in the right time and in the right location. But the assumption is they're going to make a mistake. The plane is going to go off course at certain points along the path. It's not the assumption that the plane is going to take off in New York or Pittsburgh and fly to London Heathrow over here and make it in one strip without ever making a deviation. That's
That's
not, the
right.
algorithm is not designed that way. And it's the same with our teams. We can't assume that just because we've recruited somebody who's really great and we think they're going to be a great fit for our team, that we just put them in the team and then they're going to fly off to the destination we've kind of told them we want to go to without any deviation. If we think that, we're fooling ourselves. and actually potentially causing us a real risk, because if every plane had an autopilot system that was based on you are going to get to where you're going to, and we'll only tell you if we see a deviation from that. By the time you catch the deviation, it's often going to be potentially some catastrophic thing that might happen. And it's the same with our teams. So expect your teams to make mistakes. Expect your teams to do things that aren't quite where you want them to be. Expect their behaviors to not quite match your cultural values, but give them the signal when it happens early, or the first time you notice it, so they can just correct course and come back into line. So that's
Yeah.
for me is how really important that feedback is to people.
Yeah, I love that. And just continuing that analogy, I think that the guardrails or the algorithm is your expectations as a leader. And so if we're not clear with our expectations on where we're headed, then that's on us. And we have to make sure that we get clear on expectations and we give clear expectations about where we are headed. And so when we put those guardrails in, that gives our team the ability to know, hey, when we are off course and we've gotten off course here because this is what we're expected and this is the expectation. So getting clear and not only just getting clear, but setting clear expectations. And that really is on both parts. That as the leader's part, I have to set the clear expectations. And as an individual contributor, as someone who is receiving those expectations, I need to make sure that I understand what those expectations are, because if not, we could get to London, we just may not get to Heathrow, or we might get to some other airport that's close by, right? And
Absolutely.
and that's not the intention. And so
Yeah.
getting clear, asking good questions about those expectations will help us along the way as well. So that feedback loop, that constant conversation helps us when we do have clear expectations, because it gives us the ability to adjust, as you said. That's perfect. That's great.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, if you think about the way we're talking now, we're not talking about something that's happened previously. We're talking about where we're going next.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I love
And too often, feedback focuses on what's happened previously, and we get locked into a loop that's behind us. But if you think about the plane autopilot, you think about the setting expectations, being clear about what you want. It's all about what's going to happen next, not what's just happened. And the purpose of feedback is to enable the person who you're giving the feedback to make the right next step. It's got nothing to do with the step they've just taken. And
that's right.
that might have triggered the feedback. That might have triggered the conversation, that they've done something that isn't quite to the standard that you're looking for. But our focus needs to be on helping them make the right next step. And what I see so many business leaders and business owners and individuals doing is focusing on so much on what's happened just, and almost wanting to kind of punish the person for what they've just done because it's not right. And there's no conversation about how the person takes the next step. It's just, well, that wasn't right. And why didn't you do that right? And there's like, well, I made a mistake. Well, make sure you don't make that mistake again. But that's not helping the person not make the same mistake again, because there's no focus on that future. So for me, one of the things I heard this fairly recently, but one of the things that and I love this, so I'm going to share it on the show, is rather than give people feedback, think about giving them advice.
Mhm.
Because advice is always forward focus. It's always thinking about the future. So if I come to you and say, David, I want to just give you some advice on how you can do better in your role, rather than
Mhm.
feedback on what you've just done, then it puts it in a very different perspective. And actually, as an individual receiving it, I feel less defensive about some advice somebody's going to give me than I do necessarily about that word feedback, which instantly thinks that, okay, maybe I've done something wrong. Maybe there's something that's not right here that I need to be kind of aware of. And we all know the natural kind of defenses go up, because typically when we've had feedback in the past, it's been delivered in a way that isn't particularly positive. So we've got this inbuilt resistance to it. So if we give people advice rather than feedback, we take away that initial defensive stance that we sometimes get into. So those two things I just want to call out is that future focused element, and shifting it to be advice rather than feedback.
Yeah, I love that. And and I'm not sure where I heard this. I'm not sure if this is a book, but there's something that's called feed forward, and
Yeah.
it's really to your point. It's looking forward and looking into the future. And one way that you can do this, if you're a leader, you just set it up exactly that way. You talk about the situation. Hey, tell me about this situation, and then ask a question. What do you think you could do differently moving forward? Or, here's some advice. Here's what I would do going forward. So, because what's in the past, it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
We can't change the past,
Yeah.
so we have to look forward. So you're so spot on there, Hayden, in looking forward in this whole idea of feedback or feed forward in this case. And when we do that, then we're looking to change the direction going forward and really getting to where we're headed and getting to the right results that we're looking. I, you know,
Absolutely.
I love that, and I think that then helps to lessen the difficulty of the
Mm.
conversation, because when we're talking about just course correction and what to do in the future, that relieves us a little bit of the pressure of having this difficult conversation. And I don't think that feedback has to be difficult. I think that feedback can be just feedback. It's just inputs. It's kind of like using our airplane analogy. It's just inputs on on an instrument,
Yeah.
whether it's on the autopilot. We change our end course, we change our heading,
Yeah.
or we just make a little directional change, and it's all it is. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is.
Is. Yeah, it's completely that. I think the thing that again I just want to call out for people is when you are giving feedback, you really do need to check your intentions. Because again, the way we're talking about, the way we describe it is my intention is to help you be better tomorrow or the next time you step into the arena to do whatever it is that you got to do. And that's a really positive place to come from. Is I want to help you be the best you can be when you show up. I want to help you get to the destination. I want to help you land the sale. I want to help you um, improve your productivity outcomes because actually I can see what benefit you can bring. Whatever it might be, is that real positive intent that sits there. But so many times, and I think this is linked to the difficulty, the pit in the stomach, the knowing that you've left it
Mm.
and you haven't dealt with it early enough, so it's ballooned and
Yeah.
become frustrated. Often people go into these conversations, and I genuinely think their intentions, and I've seen it and I've heard people admit to it, is I want them to feel the pain. I want them to feel my frustration. I want them to recognize how angry I am about this subject. I want them to know that they've done something wrong, and I need them to feel the kind of the reality of that. You hear people saying, "Well, I'm brutally honest," and one of the things I say is, in no place in the workplace there should ever be a space for brutality.
Reality. Yeah, absolutely.
We could be honest, but there's no need to be brutally honest. That's
Right.
that's that's not a phrase that should ever exist in any business. Um, and I'm sure there'll be people listening to this and watching this who said, "Well, I'm brutally honest with people."
Yeah,
You've
right.
just got to check yourself because when we're brutal with people, our intention isn't to help them become bigger. Our intention isn't to help them grow. When we're being brutal to somebody, our intention is to diminish, dominate, give them a piece of our mind. It's all about our ego, really, than it is their improvement in performance. So that's the big thing I want to call out people is just what are your intentions going to the conversation? Are you genuinely intended to help the person improve the next time they step forward? Or are you really, is your true intention wanting to make them feel the frustration that you faced or deal with the anger that you've had to deal with from a customer that you've dealt with? Or whatever the emotion comes with it is that what's really sitting behind your desire to have this conversation? And if it is, my advice would be don't have the conversation
Yeah.
because it's not a helpful conversation.
100%. 100%. One of the things that I wanted just to bring up at this point too, and we've been talking about the Inner Circle Summit. One of our speakers and facilitators is going to be a guy by the name of Jeff Hancher.
Mm.
And Jeff is a former executive of a Fortune 500 company, and he is a leader's leader. He talks about leadership. He teaches leadership, and he has had a great career as a leader. He's going to be talking to our members and our people in the audience about having these difficult conversations, how to have feedback conversations, how to be able to get clear on expectations, how to set good expectations. And so I just want to invite everyone again to be able to come and join us on December the 10th at the summit. And if you can't be there in person, we do have a virtual option that you'll see if you scroll down. I think it's in the middle of the registration page.
Mhm.
But our very own Paul Martinelli is giving our keynote, and you definitely don't want to miss that because it's going to be really unique. It's going to be unique to this particular group. There's going to be business owners and leaders in the room. And if you want to network with other business owners and leaders, this is a great place to be able to do that. And a great place to learn skills like we're talking about here today, Hayden.
Yeah, David, if there's one reason to come to the summit, it is absolutely come and listen to Jeff talk about this skill, because feedback is by far and away the one area that consistently in all the programs I've done with all of the leaders across the world who I've worked with, it's the one that shows up the most, and it's the one that gives us the most sleepless nights as leaders, is having to have anybody can lead a team when things are going well, when the sun's shining and everything's performing and the KPIs are through the roof and you're performing great. That's a pretty easy place to operate, and most of us can be great leaders in that space. But when tough times hit and when you've got to have those difficult conversations, or you've got to give people that hard conversation that talks around maybe they're not quite doing things the way that they need to be doing to help build the business forward, to have some of those speak straight conversations that you referenced it as, David. Those are the ones that give people the most consternation, the ones that cause them to worry the most, and truthfully, they're the ones that help us earn our stripes as a leader. They're the ones that, if we can't step into that arena and perform, then we really are falling short on our expectations of ourselves as leaders. And so, if there's no other reason to join the summit, and there are a ton of other reasons to join the summit, but if there's one reason to go there, it would be to check in with Jeff and his content around this particular topic, because I know he's going to breathe so much skill and knowledge into this subject matter for everybody who is able to attend. So we realize that you may not be in the Pittsburgh area. I can't get there, but we can join on the virtual summit and we can engage with it from there. So definitely give it a check it out and see what's available. And yeah, you won't be disappointed.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah, one of the things as you were talking about just the whole concept of feedback and not letting it I'm going to call it fester, not let it go too long. I think that is something that I'm sure that Jeff is going to talk about, is how to have those conversations in real time, and when we do that, that helps us to be able to move our situations forward, and to be able to get out of the feelings and the emotions of the situation. And that's the other thing I was going to talk about as well. As leaders, we have to recognize that we're dealing with human beings here, and sometimes we have humans who are dealing with certain things in their lives that cause emotions that maybe cause us to miss things. Maybe we overlooked things. Maybe we just didn't see things, or maybe we even have a blind spot or a gap in our skill training. Whatever that is, we have to recognize that there are emotions involved. And so when we first have those conversations, I think it's really important for our leaders to check in with how our people are really doing. Like how are they doing? Tell me about where you're at emotionally. How's your mental health? I know it's been taboo to think about or talk about those things.
Yeah.
But in today's day and age, we have to talk about these things, and we have to be able to really press in and engage even when it's difficult. So remember that we have human beings who are emotional beings, and they may be dealing with something that we maybe not are aware we're not aware of at the time. So I think that
Yeah.
that's really important.
Yeah, it's so true. And again, what triggers into my thoughts there is you might perceive something, so you might be see that they're slightly off track. But again, let's just check in and see the reality of the situation from their perspective rather than just go purely on our own perception. So remember to ask questions. And one of the things I always tell people to do is before you start giving your opinion of their performance in a feedback session, ask them how they think they've done. Because often that will expose their own view and maybe some of the reasons why things have happened the way they have happened that you might be completely unaware of, like the personal issues that are happening outside of work, like well, actually, there's been a really confusing communication come down. Maybe you haven't done your job properly as the leader, and that's the reason why their performance isn't to the standard. When we ask the question as to how do you think you've done and what's created that for you, we create an opportunity for us to learn something that can enable us to help them take the next step forward better. If we just go forward and say, well, you're not doing this right, and I need you to do this to get back on track, we're losing all of that context around the situation. And actually, what we tell them to do may not be the right thing to do. Going back to your analogy of the flying to the ground in the spin last week that we talked
Yeah.
about, pull it up on the throttle may be the wrong thing completely to do because we haven't understood the context of what is needed to get back on track.
So true, so true. Well, I think that I think that these are some ideas and some practical applications of how to have these conversations, these feedback conversations, to be able to get clear on expectations and really be able to help us in the realm of aligning people with our values and really making sure that we are growing in this season of our growth. And I think it's really important to be able to have these conversations. So, Hayden, any last words as we wrap up this session here today?
The one thing that I just want to leave people with is if you're a leader of a team or a business, the performance of that team is your responsibility.
Yeah.
And if they're not performing to the level that require, the first place you need to look is, have I done everything I could do to help them be the best they can be? And often we don't. We go to saying, well, actually, we need to have those difficult conversations with people. Sometimes we need to have that difficult conversation with ourselves that says,
Yeah, yeah.
Hayden, maybe you've not been as clear as you need to be. Maybe you've not set the expectations clearly. Maybe you've not told the person that they're not doing things the way that they need to be done to be more to improve. And sometimes we have to look at ourselves first. So if you have a team and if you led that team for more than 6 months, the quality of that team's output is on you, not on them. That's what I would give as a last thought for people, just a challenge to step into this place of taking responsibility for feedback, because it's such an important part of our role as leaders to help our teams become more effective.
Totally. Great advice. Great place to end our session here today. Thank you to everyone who's watching. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to our ambassadors. You are amazing, and we really appreciate you moderating the comments below. Love to see you at the Inner Circle Summit. If you're able to be here in person in Pittsburgh, we would love that. Come see some of the people who are a part of this Inner Circle community. Definitely, you're going to want to hear from Paul and Andy as well, and Jeff Hancher, as we've mentioned today as well. So thanks again for tuning in, everyone. And until next time, be well, and we'll see you soon.
Have a great week.